So, I know how it happens. It starts off as someone brings up Bigfoot, you kind of laugh. Well, they would have found a body by now, or science would have discovered it, and people have been everywhere. Then you go hiking and camping, or maybe hunting, or drive through the Pacific Northwest and drive through the Rockies and the Sierras and realize how much untouched land there is and how many remote places there are. And you start to think that all these people seeing something that, maybe there is something to this Bigfoot thing. But it would have to be pretty isolated, maybe a few spots. Then you start looking into Bigfoot. Maybe you watch Finding Bigfoot on television, or you catch a documentary here or there. Then you start looking into, maybe this thing exists. Then you start realizing there's regional variations, the different types, the four basic types, the patty type, the wood booger type, the gugwy, protruding face type, and a relic hominid type. And then you start hearing about the skunk ape, the Mogollon monster, the Ohio grass man, and you're like, wow, there's a lot more to this Bigfoot thing than the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot going on here. And so you start reading, you start watching some videos. Before you know it, you find yourself on YouTube, watching every video out there, seeing if it's real or fake. Then you find yourself discovering that, wow, there's maybe some different types of Bigfoot that are really ferocious, and there's some that are really quite gentle and docile, and there's some that you can mess around with, and that there's some that might very well be kidnapping people or eating people even. So you get into this Bigfoot subject, you start, the scary stuff is always interesting, and that's what people always want to hear. It's why we love sharks, why we love bears and tigers and all that kind of stuff. So you're on the internet and you start looking around and you're like, well, there's some that look like a classic fanged monster, and there's other types that look like an overgrown orangutan. And then you start realizing that the great apes bear a lot of resemblance to these different types of Bigfoot. Then it gets into the theory of what they are, where they came from. Are they all offshoots of each other, or are they separate species? Did the government or some really out there theory about who created these things and where they came from? Are they a natural biological creatures? And then that kind of leads you into missing 411 and all the missing people all across the United States, and what a phenomenon and cover-up that's going on with that. And we're talking people who didn't fall in a river or bump their head. We're talking people who completely vanished under mysterious circumstances, never to be heard from again, clothes found folded up, or bodies when they are found in a really high rocky outcropping, lots of kids, special needs people, elderly, and you start looking into it and you're like, wow, the missing 411, this kind of coincides with a lot of mountainous areas and areas that really have a lot of Bigfoot sightings, like the big cluster there on the left in California. Gee, that's Yosemite, the missing person hotspot in the United States. And you start to think, wow, maybe there's something more to this. There's a lot of Bigfoot out there. They're spotted all over the place. People are seeing these things. There's hundreds of reports happen every single day. From all walks of life, people see these things. And then you start thinking they're just a regular creature that's been undiscovered. And then you get into this long enough and you start hearing about the really bizarre stuff, like Bigfoot had glowing red eyes. And I didn't shine a flashlight on it, but its eyes were glowing red and it stared at me. Or you get stories of them cloaking like the predator, turning invisible. Or you get out there stories about mind speak, where it spoke to me telepathically. And you don't know what to make of these. Nobody does. People are reporting them. Why would people make this stuff up? Why would people who have never met each other describe almost the exact same thing? And then inevitably, when you get into Bigfoot, you start hearing about this dogman creature. And you're like, what's up with that? And you're like, well, I know some Bigfoots might have more of a protruding snout like a baboon. But then this is something different. It's got kind of legs shaped like a dog. And this is the Michigan dogman and the rougarou in the south. And then you realize all over Europe and all over the place, they're seeing these things too. Certainly a little more inherently dangerous or evil looking, certainly a lot more unsettling, because there's a lot of stuff going on with the great apes, but not a lot for an upright dog. Then you start looking around the world for all the different types of cryptid activity, and you realize there's a lot of things that look like a Bigfoot all over the all over the world, and a lot of other crazy things. People report seeing dinosaurs or strange bear-like creatures, and people in the United States even report way back in the hills of Montana and Canada and Minnesota and going up into Alaska, a lot of sightings where it's like, oh, I saw something that was 8 or 10 feet tall. Okay, that was a Bigfoot. Okay, well, I saw something that was 19 or 20 feet tall. Oh, that's not a Bigfoot. Built more slender, built more like a basketball player than a football player. Something that may have been carrying a club or had red hair. Something that had fangs protruding from its jaw. And you're, wait a minute, that's not a Bigfoot, but they're in some of the same areas. And then since you're into this subject and you're looking around, you stumble across other things you've heard of. We've all heard of the Loch Ness Monster. And you think, wow, that's just local folklore. Somebody saw a log. And then there's a lot of sightings, and there's, with cameras and everything else out there, and there's people actually spending money, good money to research this thing. And you think, well, if people are spending good money to research this thing, there must be some shred of it being real. Then when you get into this cryptid business, you realize Bigfoot's very tame, and so is the Dogman relatively. When you hear about the Enfield horror, this three-legged tripod clawed-looking creature that bounced around and hopped around on a leg that was terrorizing the town. And you're like, okay, that's pretty bizarre. That's something like right out of a video game or something very strange. And you're like, wow, that makes Bigfoot look pretty tame. And then you hear about other even more bizarre stories about like 4 or 5 foot tall frog walking around upright, carrying a magic wand of all things. But a whole town saw him crossing the road, saw him running around in a pond, have a whole history of him. And that's the Loveland frog. And you're like, okay, well, people are seeing something. People who don't know each other are reporting the same thing. What am I supposed to make from that? Are they from another dimension? Is it some kind of genetic hybrid? Is there something in the water and everybody's hallucinating because it's on their mind? And then when you get into Bigfoot, you start hearing about these strange lights in the woods that follow them around. And you're like, what's up with these strange lights? Are they alien drones, basically? Are they disembodied souls? Are they somebody remote viewing? Are they ball lightning? Are they random orbs? Are they just reflections back on a camera? Are they spirits from Native American culture? They follow Bigfoot around. They seem to be intelligently controlled. Sometimes they lead people off of cliffs and into bad places. And you hear a lot about these orbs, and you hear a lot of them in Bigfoot territory or even in the area. Like, are they watching the Bigfoots? Are they controlling the Bigfoots? Are they following them around? What's up with these strange lights in the woods? And then maybe you're spending time in the woods in Bigfoot and you come across these things like I have, where you're like, what the hell is that light out in the woods doing out there, silently moving through when you would hear a person crunching along and it's not a person. It's bizarre. This whole stuff just gets bizarre. And then from there, you're like, well, what are lights? And then you're like looking at trail camera photos and you're stumbling across the internet and you're like, wow, look at this ghost thing. I'm not really into ghosts at all. Well, that's a really creepy picture. It's like, gee, is that real? Is that photoshopped? And then you watch videos and you end up on falling down the YouTube hole, like I said, and end up really getting into this. And you're like, wow, what about ghost stuff too? People see strange ghosts in the woods and Civil War battlefields and all that haunted stuff. And then you start hearing things about things that just seem not cryptid-like, but more demonic, like these goat men abducting people and strange demonic-like creatures and carrying off kids in the woods. And you get to really obscure stuff, like the rake and some of these other creatures that I don't think you could call cryptids. I think you could call them very paranormal, almost demons, if you will, if lack of a better term, or something from another realm or another dimension, or just our worst nightmares being projected. And then since you're into this, you start hearing stuff about UFOs. Which you're starting to see more and more mainstream news. You go on CNN or FoxNews.com, whatever totes your goat there, and you see stories about, more and more, it's like every day now. It's just a regular news story like with everything else. Hey, UFO film, because cameras are everywhere. Airplane pilot, domestic, military aircraft, people on the ground, strange lights in the skies, where 15, 20 years ago you were crazy and everybody just goes, oh yeah, really? It was like, hey, I saw a deer on the way to work. Oh yeah, I saw a UFO. Oh, cool. And it all started because maybe you heard a bump in the woods, you heard a howl you can't explain, you were flipping through channels, and you came across a Bigfoot documentary, or a friend of his says he saw something run across the road in the night, or you just generally had an open mind and you weren't one of these stick in the mud type people who was just skeptical about everything and to the point of ignoring evidence. So that's basically the rabbit hole that happens to people in Bigfoot. If this has happened to you, please leave a comment below and let me know. My path on this was a little bit different. I worked at a haunted building and that kind of sparked my interest. And then I had a friend of mine who, going way back, was into some UFO stuff and government cover-up, and he worked in the government. And he told me quite a bit of things, and then always had a cursory interest in Bigfoot. And in the last few years, Bigfoots and cryptids have really interested me. And then you realize it kind of all ties together and they kind of all cross over, and they all talk about the same things and have responsibility for it, and it's all quite fascinating. So that's why I like to call Sasquatch the gateway drug. Because it's if you're a logical person, you could probably talk them into at least believing in Sasquatch or accepting it's a responsibility. But I'm not saying it's downhill from there, but it's your first step into a larger world. Thank you very much, everybody, and stay safe in the woods.